Hi everybody, I'm Rook and welcome back to the table. Welcome to another top 5 list as we round out the end of the top 5 week here on the channel. If you guys missed the past top 5s, please feel free to check them out. Today we are looking at the top 5 rogue cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! Speed Duel. These are my top 5 cards that aren't played terribly consistently, but I think have great potential and have the ability to be explosive and maybe even surprise you if it's splashed into a deck. Let's get started with my top 5 rogue cards currently in the format. Starting at number 5 is a newer card, one we saw in the starter decks that came out in May. We're looking at Visor Shock for number 5. This is a 5-star monster. The weird thing about this card is it's only 800 attack, 600 defense. That sounds like a super early Yu-Gi-Oh! Vanilla card no one would ever play. The kicker for this card is its effect. When this card is normal summoned, flip summoned, or special summoned, return all set cards on the field to their owner's respective hands. So seen in play, you're usually tribute summoning this card, but what it does is depending on how your opponent is set up, depending on what decks you're playing against in the current meta, there's a good chance that this could be a sleeper card your opponent didn't realize you were running or even siding. Say that an opponent's playing very defensive against you because they're trying to set up Conflict Warrior, they're trying to set up Moth. That leaves you knowing that there's a good chance that they're not going to get too aggressive early on and they're not going to try and attack you, they're going to try and set up. So your set monsters may live to the next turn. If you have Visor Shock, all of a sudden you're tributing for Visor Shock and they have to pick everything back up off the field. If you already have an aggressive board and you tribute for Visor Shock, so let's say you have 2 other monsters that are on the field also, all set cards are going to the owner's respective hands. That's all back row and all set monsters. That includes you, so please be careful about how you set your back row. I would tribute for Visor Shock first. This has the potential to open your opponent's field up for a crazy direct attack. It could be lethal. This could be a very close to death, almost OTK situation if you have the correct tribute for Visor Shock. Now this isn't main decked because it's very hard to pull off and it's really kind of a fool me once card, where once your opponent knows you're running this, they're not going to be as defensive set. They might try and play around it a little more. So it's a great side option that you can just splash into a deck, especially if you're already leaning towards tributing for other fiends like Gap the Divine Soldier, Dark Ruler Hades. Splashing a little Visor Shock in there might serve you well. Definitely one of those bombs that just hits the field and has the potential to really turn the game in your favor. So Visor Shock, that's my number 5. My number 4 rogue card in the Speed Duel format right now. Let's talk about Desert Twister, guys. This is a card that people kind of forgot. Did people even play this? Maybe. Personally, I saw this card played a lot because I saw folks that really tried to make this card work. Desert Twister is a neat little boss monster that came out in the Arena Lost Souls box, which is the first official booster box that came out in the set back in 2019. It's got 2300 attack and 2000 defense, and it can't be normal summoned or set. How it's special summoned is that you have to banish 2 wind monsters and 1 earth monster from your graveyard. So think of like Chaos Sorcerer, that's the light and the dark, right? This is 2 wind, 1 earth. So that requirement's a little higher and it's a little harder to achieve. You're not always necessarily just naturally running wind and earth monsters in your deck. Whereas light and dark, maybe that was a little easier to achieve with Chaos Sorcerer. But the other effect of Desert Twister, besides being able to special summon it essentially for free if your graveyard meets the requirements, is once per turn you can discard a card, then target 1 spell trap on the field, destroy it. So if you have cards in your hand additionally, you can drop a card to the graveyard, and then you can start clearing out your opponent's back row. So let's think about Speed Duel for a second. What do we think of when we say wind monster? Probably Harpy Ladies. And what do we think of when we say earth? Most likely warriors. Where I saw this card splashed in, teched, sided in a lot was Tribal Synergy. Tribal Synergy was a very popular deck that was played heavily in the era of the Serpent Knight Dragon before the Trials of the Kingdom booster box. The general consensus on Desert Twister is that a deck never consistently achieved the result of having the monsters in your graveyard every time for Desert Twister to come out, but Tribal Synergy was a great deck to run it in because you're dealing with Harpy Ladies, which is wind, and Amazoness, which is a warrior monster, which is earth. It was really the only deck you were trying to put this in unless you were constructing some sort of other just kind of all rogue. There really aren't that many other wind monsters besides Harpy Ladies, but you know, Blue Dragon Summoner is actually a wind monster. Spirit Ryu, I believe, is a wind monster. You know, all those cards that we don't really use anymore. So Desert Twister was really trying to be seen in Tribal Synergy. And another thing about Tribal Synergy is that the skill Tribal Synergy gave you a lot of card draw off of just naturally having Harpy Ladies and Amazonas in your hand and having one of each on the field. So that plays very well with Desert Twister's effect of once per turn you can drop a card to the grave, then target a spell trap on the field, destroy it. So that deck gave you the opportunity not only to get Desert Twister out, but to have additional cards in your hand to activate its secondary effect. I think it's a pretty neat card. I liked the resourcefulness of the players that tried to use it in their decks, and I'm hoping that the Battle City box comes out with more wind monsters, and maybe we might see Desert Twister come back. So Desert Twister, that's my number 4. All right, my number 3 rogue card currently in the Speed Duel format is Blast Sphere. Blastsphere has been a card that since it's come out, it's never necessarily been main decked, unless maybe you're playing Spellproof Armor or Heavy Metal Raiders. People tried to play that deck when it came out. Blastsphere is a dark machine, so it works well in those decks. Blastsphere was seen initially upon its release last year as a really good side option. This is a card that you always set, and then if your opponent's monster attacks into it, it all of a sudden equips to your opponent's monster before battle damage, damage calculation, anything like that. And on the opponent's next standby phase, kaboom! It explodes, and your opponent takes life point damage equal to the monster's attack that it was equipped to. So this had a tendency to just come out of the blue as a good side option. If you personally were playing a deck with a lot of set cards, and at the time we were also seeing a lot of Maneater Bug, we were seeing a set Command Knight. Myself, I was playing Dinosaur Kingdom, so I was setting Gale Lizard, but swapping this card out in a side deck really contributed to the mind games that you were playing with your opponent and giving your opponent less and less of a clear understanding of what exactly you were setting. Sometimes the opponent never even thinks to expect Blastsphere in your insect deck, right? It's a dark machine. But Blastsphere is very versatile and works pretty much everywhere. There are a lot of cards out currently that can take care of this card before it explodes. There's a lot of magic removal. Everybody's very wary of the back row and the parasites, so there is a lot of magic removal that can take Blastsphere out, which is why it's not seen as much. But just the other day, I was playing Dark Moth and my opponent sided in a Blastsphere against me, and here I am confident that my moths are going to bowl over everything. Well, one of them was a Blastsphere. It's set to explode on me for 3,500 attack next turn. That's the attack of Moth. And I actually didn't have the magic removal as a resource to be able to destroy it. It cost me the duel. So Blastsphere is sneaky. A lot of people still keep it in the side. And sometimes if you're staring down the barrel of a huge boss monster attack, it works. So Blastsphere, that's my number 3. My number 2 rogue card in the Speed Duel format. Showing the spellcasters a little love here, Dark Red Enchanter. I've really managed to avoid talking about spellcasters in general in this whole series, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Dark Red Enchanter as a really solid attempt to make a more streamlined spellcaster deck. We have folks in the format that are clinging to their Dark Magician OTKs, trying to use Dark Magician Girl. I personally think that Dark Red Enchanter was the most consistent way to go if you're trying to build a spellcaster deck. It's a good boss monster that you tribute for, 1700 attack, 2200 defense, but this comes with spell counters on it when it's tributed. So if it's normal summon, you place 2 spell counters on it, it gains 300 attack for each spell counter. So it's naturally at 23 when it comes in. You can remove the 2 spell counters from the card, and you can discard a random card from your opponent's hand. This was one of the few discard effects that we saw early on in the game before we saw something like Twisted Personality come out where you're discarding maybe every other turn. Additionally, every time you activate a spell card, you place a spell counter on the card. So Dark Red Enchanter's attack can go up and down based on spell counters, and there's that extra utility to drop the 2 counters to discard from hand, similar to how we drop 2 counters from Twisted Personality to discard from hand. So 6-star monster, only have to tribute 1. Fair beater at 23, not a bad boss monster, runs very nicely in your spellcaster deck. If we see more spellcaster support coming up in the Battle City box, are we going to see Dark Red Enchanter come back into being a consistent staple for spellcasters? The reason that this is on the rogue list is because spellcasters are kind of rogue right now, but Dark Red Enchanter is the leader of the bunch, and that's my number 2. All right, my number 1 rogue deck card in the Speed Duel format right now, we are going with the Hyper Hammerhead. There's a little bit of bias here. I have a soft spot for dinosaurs, but Hyper Hammerhead, since it came out in the Rex and Weevil decks, it's splashed everywhere. I've seen it in, well, obviously I ran Dinosaur Kingdom when that deck came out. I've seen it in Spellcasters. I've seen it in Warriors. It really is a good standalone card that you can just tech into every deck. That's what we're looking for. We're looking for good techs. Now, consistently in the meta, you don't really see it anywhere, but its effect can't be slept on. This is a 4-star dinosaur monster, 1500 attack, which, you know, back last year, that was a pretty normal attack for a 4-star to have. Now we're seeing obviously 17, 18, but with Dinosaur Kingdom that put it at 18. And the effect is at the end of the damage step, if an opponent's monster that battled this card is not destroyed, return that monster to the hand. So if your opponent has a solid wall of monsters up and you have Hyper Hammerhead, you can slam into something in defense mode, maybe take a little bit of life point damage, but you're using Hyper Hammerhead's effect to return that monster to the hand, which might make it harder for them to get it out a second time. Additionally, you could even set this card against something like Moth and watch Moth swing into this Hyper Hammerhead, trying to clear out your board so it can annihilate you, and then that Moth is going back to hand. Most likely your opponent got that out by activating the Cocoon of Ultra Evolution already, which means their skill is burnt, which means there's really no chance that they're going to get that back out. So Hyper Hammerhead has some versatility. I don't think currently it's fast enough to compete with the Warrior decks. Warrior decks are moving a little too fast, and Inner Conflict taking this monster just to tribute it off is tough. But Hyper Hammerhead, a great card that can surprise you, and one of the reasons why I gave this number 1 is because this really has the ability, similar to like Blastsphere, this really has the ability to be placed into any deck. It's also a great looking card. I hope there's more dinosaur support in the future for Speed Duel in the Speed Duel box. We were kind of getting a peek at Jurax towards the end, maybe Trials of the Kingdom, Scars of Battle, but we could never really flesh out a Jurax deck. Prove me wrong if I'm wrong there. Please comment a Jurax deck list below if you actually have one. But anyway, Hyper Hammerhead, that's my number 1. That's my top 5 rogue cards for Yu-Gi-Oh! Speed Duel right now. Any questions, any concerns, post them below. Let's have a discussion. What other cards do you see splashed into decks here and there that have potential that people tend to sleep on? I want to know. If you guys enjoyed this video, please feel free to hit the like button, and of course, subscribe for more. If you've been enjoying all of the top 5 videos, I heartily recommend you subscribe as more content similar to this is coming your way. And of course, this is top 5 weeks, so we have another one tomorrow. Thanks, guys. I'll catch you later.